an event of handshakes in the White House in September of 1993. Um, the maximum that political process have provided Palestinians is the map on in brown, like where you see the maximum offer for a two-state solution given by the last labor government of the state of Israel. It was headed by a war criminal called Ehud Barak, and he suggested that brown would be Palestine on the authority Yasser Arafat, and he rejected this. And because he rejected this, he ended up being locked up and killed in his office in Ramallah in front of everybody in the world. When Palestinians rejected this, Ehud Barak, I'm talking about a labor, a leftist Israeli, he described Palestinians are like, the Palestinians are like crocodiles. The more you give meat, the more you give them meat, they want more. Um, so like in diplomacy, Palestinians also are viewed as beggars. There is no respect whatsoever. I can tell you about alone respect their human rights. So what I'm trying to say here is that on global political level, nobody has, been able to recognize, let alone work towards end of Israeli apartheid. The street has proven to be kind of like not as effective in ending Israeli apartheid, but has been very, very, very effective in expressing solidarity with the Palestinian survivors of Israeli apartheid, and so on with the UN, and so on with diplomacy. So where does that leave us? That actually leaves us with things that worked. We've been very distracted from things that work. Many people keep saying, like, the United States is not going to allow this, the United States is not going to allow that. We can do this, we can do that. Inspired by Palestinian survival, when Palestinians want to express their rejection of Israeli apartheid, where do you think they go? They go to the address of the Israeli oppressor. In my street, the address is the Israeli military base installed on the northern part of Bethlehem. It's the Israeli military vehicle. It has to be an Israeli address. Around the world, the Israeli address is the Israeli embassy or the consulate. You know, support of the state of Israel by the United States does not qualify to the support the United States of America provided apartheid South Africa for more than 40 years. The apartheid South Africa is a territory that is wealthy in natural resources. We don't have uranium. We don't have gold. We don't have diamond. We don't have tea. We don't have natural resources. What do we have? We have a military base for the United States and the region. That's it. So if there was success in ending apartheid in like starting from the United States of America, then we probably have the potential of succeeding in that country also. In the sense that how did apartheid end in the United States of America? How did the relations between the United States and apartheid South Africa started? I'll just take your attention to something happened starting November 1984. After years of expressions of solidarity, inspired by actually the civil rights movement 20 years earlier, it was a time to start addressing the embassy of apartheid South Africa in DC. There were calls for people to come together to that embassy as early as November of 1984. 13 months later, 6,000 arrests later, the embassy of apartheid South Africa was shut down. That's the way you confront apartheid. you know. So if the solidarity movement starts looking at the address of Israeli apartheid in their countries, then we will probably have a chance of start challenging and shutting down Israeli apartheid from capitals and cities around the world. Now, that is with countries that do have diplomatic relations with the State of Israel. What happened with countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, and nearly out of 167, no, out of 193 countries on the planet, 167 recognize the State of Israel. So they have relations with Israeli apartheid. So the way to deal with them has to be direct action. It doesn't have to be like convincing Israelis that, you should kill Palestinians better, or you should kill less of them. You should not steal their land every day, or we're trying to convince Israelis to stop benefiting from the crime of apartheid, because obviously that doesn't work. So the main thing that I see would work is the one thing that was never tried. Over the past 75 years, everything tried, even bribing the State of Israel into stopping murdering Palestinians. What did the United States do for the State of Israel to maintain its genocide? They bribed them with more than $14 billion, but said like, please don't kill a lot of civilians. So even bribery doesn't work. So the only thing I see that could work is the one thing that was never tried, which is shutting down by the masses, not by a political decision, because the political decision is not going to happen. No one politician would die for Palestine. That's something that is very, 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 very clear. For countries that don't have diplomatic relations with the State of Israel, we've been talking about targeting multinationals. We were talking about countries that benefit and profit from Israeli criminal behavior. We were talking about many things that have been tried, and we have many successes in the boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaign that we can pinpoint. Like we have an experience that actually predates the year 2005 in this campaign. So we have a lot of successes when it comes to raising awareness, when it comes to bringing people into understanding of what Palestinians have been surviving and so on. But there might be like another approach for countries that do not have diplomatic relations with the State of Israel. When we address the issue as like we don't have diplomatic relations with the State of Israel, it's a matter of time until we do. So look at the country like the United Arab Emirates. We don't have diplomatic relations with the State of Israel. It became a matter of time. Look at what's happening in Saudi Arabia. It's a matter of time, and so on and so forth. So we need to actually change a little bit of that perspective in political circles that no, we are proudly celebrating sanctions of this criminal regime. We impose sanctions. We're active about imposing sanctions on this apartheid regime. When we shift this attitude a little bit, also our political conduct and our influence will also shift with it. So when we impose sanctions, it doesn't matter if 15 million Palestinians come to you here in Malaysia or Indonesia, all of us, and beg you to have relationships or diplomatic relations with the State of Israel. You'll close that door. And like, I understand your despair as a Palestinian victim of apartheid, but we are not going for the sake of the principles of the upheld in this country or in other countries. We are not going to have any diplomatic relations whatsoever with this apartheid criminal regime. Second thing is like, how can we actually influence other governments to follow the same? There are a lot of ideas that are very, very practical. Like one thing that was never tried. Any country that has diplomatic relations with the State of Israel also have economic relations with this country, trying to introduce even a cent of extra tax on goods coming from countries or sent to countries that have diplomatic relations with the State of Israel. and it would be like, oh, the Palestine tax. And whatever funds generate from there should be spent on those countries to educate people in those countries about why they should be imposing sanctions on this criminal regime. They're very basic, small ideas that if we start with them anywhere, they will grow into this snowball that we all want to see that will crush Israeli apartheid, turn it into some kind of history where it will be possible for us to celebrate time or to celebrate freedom and justice uh, in Palestine. So what I'm saying is that governments that do not impose sanctions or do not have diplomatic relations with the state of Israel need to be celebrated as examples in the world rather than treating them as the exception in the world. Like, oh, why don't you follow the example of the United Arab Emirates? And it's like, well, why to fall into corruption? We know that crime should not gain credibility because of its acceptance. Crime remains a crime. If the entire world accepts Israeli apartheid regime, that doesn't mean that it stops being apartheid regime. It means that the world is corrupt, you know? And it's as simple as, um, yeah, it's as simple as that. As for us Palestinians, like we will continue to survive, you know? If we start viewing Palestinians as survivors of Israeli apartheid regime, you know, you will understand us better. You'll understand that some of us survive in ways you love and inspired by. Some of us survive in ways you hate. Like you have Palestinians who survive both extremes. Like what I'm trying to say here is that the call should not always come from the Palestinian because we are survivors. Like we have Palestinians who survive the both extremes, as I said. One extreme is sacrificing life to get rid of Israeli apartheid, and one extreme is surviving, sacrificing life to protect Israeli apartheid. We have many Palestinian sellouts, you know, like in any situation of oppression. What Malcolm X would describe as the house Negro. Like we have few house Negroes in Palestine. So when you look at Palestinians as survivors, you pick and choose whoever you want, and you will only deal with the people that actually appeal to your moral sense. But once again, it's not about our survival. There are basic things that we all need to stick to, even against my will. Everyone is born free and equal. So if I tell you that I'm okay with lack of freedom, if I tell you I'm okay with inequality, you should slap me in the face and say, hey, wake up. This is not a kind of decent life for anybody on the planet, let alone Palestinians. So I'm saying is like, do not look at it from our point of view of survival. Like in every country, you have many Palestinian representatives who would talk about two-state solution, for example, who would talk about this diplomatic thing. And it's like, okay, you can listen to those, but also listen to what is right and what's wrong. If a Palestinian accepts being primitive in his homeland, you try to educate them, you know, but don't try to support them. The last thing about where we are right now, which is maintenance of Israeli apartheid. Like, when will Israeli apartheid come to an end? I don't know. And I don't believe anybody who tells me like I know, because they suggest that they have the crystal ball and they looked into the future. No, nobody can look into the future. Like I do not know when Israeli apartheid will come to an end, but I know it's inevitable because in Palestine, oppression is not sustainable. That's what we get from our indigenous wisdom, indigenous understanding of 23 different civilizations that ruled over that geography. And we understand that oppression is not sustainable. Will it happen in my lifetime? I don't know. Will it happen post my lifetime? Definitely. Um, so when, I don't know, but for how long will it go on? So if I don't have the answers for this, I do have the answers for why and for how long it will go on. And the answer to that is very simple. As long as we have governments around the world that provide Israeli apartheid with means of survival, economic means, diplomatic means, and military means, and at the same time provide Palestinians with a humanitarian aid, you know, those countries support both sides of the same oppression, and the only outcome of supporting both sides of the same oppression is maintaining oppression. I don't need to be a genius actually to understand that. It's not, once again, it's not rocket science. When you support both sides of the exact same problem, the only outcome is maintaining the problem. Um, and that's what's happening actually around the world. The United States is the biggest supporter of the state of Israel economically, diplomatically, and with military means, but also it's the biggest supporter for UNRWA. It's the biggest supporter for humanitarian aid for the Palestinian people. No one country, I don't think even Malaysia, has been generous towards Palestinian humanitarian aid to Palestinians as much as the United States of America. So supporting both sides of the exact same problem results on maintaining that problem. Now, the way that is justified is like, no, we don't support the state of Israel because it murders Palestinians. We don't support the state of Israel because it destroys the Palestinian people. We don't support the state of Israel because of genocide. And they distract us. But the actual position, if you think about it, is more immoral than that. They provide support for Israeli apartheid despite of its criminal behavior towards Palestinians. And if you think about it a little bit, it means that the life of a Palestinian does not exist in relation to how we support the state of Israel. It's a little bit more offensive position than we support them because they eliminate Palestinians. You know? So support despite of the elimination of the Palestinian people is ways worse than support because of the elimination of the Palestinian people. So as long as we have governments around the world that provide diplomatic, economic, and military support for Israeli apartheid, and at the same time provide humanitarian aid for us to survive Israeli apartheid, this reality will continue to be the status quo in Palestine. How to target it? Once again, you target it by going directly to the address. Make sense? So thank you for listening.
It's very interesting points for us. Maybe anybody wants to comment or ask a question, go ahead.
When you say inside Israel, you refer exclusively to Jewish Israelis, right? Okay.
Can you repeat the question for the people?
Okay. The question is like, we spoke about what can we do outside the world, but what is it we can do within Jewish Israeli society? The state of Israel have created, some kind of mental as well as physical barrier to prevent the change within that society. We do have some exceptions, but Jewish Israelis are beneficiaries of this process against their will or with their will. Like, it's not like if I was born to a Jewish Israeli family, it will be in my hands to topple down this racist regime. No. So what you would do in there right now is probably nothing. Like you can, as in Malaysia, you can tell Israelis that, hey, if you stop being a beneficiary of Israeli criminal behavior and give up your citizenship, we might think of giving you temporary residency in Malaysia. We want to save them from themselves. The other thing, like, you need to understand the immunity of the regime to the masses, the mass like pressure. The immunity of the regime is visible not only in relation of beneficiaries of Israeli criminal behavior towards us. Like for the past 10 months, the streets of Tel Aviv were covered with people who are standing against their own government. They were not protesting for my right to equality and self-determination and reparation and justice and. No, they were like, we want to be more comfortable within this, apartheid regime. Make sense? So what is it you can do? For the time being, nothing, because the role of Jewish Israelis, especially those who believe in equality and justice, and being hammered and silenced and persecuted and will be very important in the era after the collapse of Israeli apartheid. Like the transition that was carried out in apartheid South Africa, post apartheid, where white people played a very important role. The transition that happened in the United States, post apartheid in the United States, or post Jim Crow laws, the collapse of Jim Crow laws, the transition that was carried out by white Americans there. So that is the time that Jewish Israelis who believe in equality, freedom, and justice will be important. For the time being, they are beneficiaries of criminal behavior against their will. So,
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think got the message. So, any other question for us? Just if there's nobody is gonna say anything. For us in Malaysia, country that has no normalization with Israel, you mentioned just now that we must make sure that that policy is maintained, right?
it's maintained in Malaysia and celebrated around the world as the higher moral stand.
Okay, yeah,
You
that's the one that we want to spread out. Make sure that
Yeah.
other countries.
we need to identify the means to be able to go in that. Like there are different ideas that will actually take us towards that.
Thank you. But I just want to highlight that that is also a challenge by itself, which we must also be aware. For example, it's Malaysia and Indonesia now are under pressure actually for normalization, and one of the reasons is because of the economic implications. Some countries are offering money to invest in Indonesia, in Malaysia, if these countries change their policy towards Israel actually.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the reason why some people in Indonesia especially are talking about openly about
they want to bribe you.
Yeah,
it's bribery. Like,
yeah. So I think that is what people in Malaysia, we are talking in Malaysia now, be very aware of, that if we do not do something about those values, making people aware of what's happening, not only what is happening in Palestine, the atrocities there, but also what is happening here, meaning in terms of people becoming more materialistic, more concerned about economic development, talking about GDP growth all the time, right? Talking about economy all the time, compared to talking about justice, then we don't be surprised if we will start talking about normalization too in the future and ignore the plight of the Palestinians. So this is something which we need to educate Malaysian society about this issue. And I study a bit about finance, etc. The growth of debt in society now. Consumer debt is more than 1 trillion, 1.2 trillion in Malaysia now. When you have a lot of debt over your head, you think about how to settle the debt rather than about helping Palestinians.
Very,
right?
very true.
Pay for your car, pay for your house, pay for your children's education. say, why do I need to think about Palestinians if I am suffering over here? That's why we need to also talk about value systems in our own society in order to help Palestinians.
Yeah.
Comment?
I do have a comment on that.
Yeah.
It's not only in Malaysia. It works on neutralizing like a large part of the Palestinian society also.
As well.
Yeah. In Palestine, like so many of us are not involved because they can barely survive under Israeli oppression. It's very easy to get like a bank loan and get neutralized, even when you are a survivor of Israeli criminal behavior. Financial benefits to fall in line after the state of Israel is bribery. Like I bribe you to accept the unacceptable.
Yeah.
That's the concept of bribe. So this is why I'm saying, like, to encounter this ignorance, you have to also think of workable economic means. Uh, you, there's something crazy that's going in wealthy countries. Like I honestly have no understanding what world is Africa poorer than Europe, other than the world we live in today. They give us the impression that your only survival is based on allowing us to steal your resources or buy your resources for which. But in fact, like, we need to recognize what are the things that we're blessed with in terms of natural and human resources, and try to say, like, okay, we have this and we want to tax it, and the taxation will be pumped back into your society as like capitalist, consumerist, individualist societies, in order to provide you with some education that you lack, moral education that you lack. So you know better than me that economic influence can be used both ways.
Yeah.
Right now, it's used to support criminal and savage and racist behavior, but we can actually think of ways where the exact same tool is used for good.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Baha, for
Sama-sama.
very nice presentation and good discussion. So we proceed on the next menu on the item. Oh, it's coffee break now. Is it? Is it coffee break now? All right, coffee break for until and till 10:30. We have 20 minutes, and then we go for the next presentation.